You are listening to the Intelligent Racer Podcast, where we look to educate and entertain the endurance racing community through discussions with racing professionals and elite age groupers.
In today's episode of the podcast, I speak with amateur triathlete Emily Loughnan. Emily recently finished first overall for female amateur athletes at the Ironman World Championships in Kona. We talk about this race and other triathlon topics. I hope you enjoy. Emily, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so why don't we just start off with learning a little bit about your athletic background? Can you just kind of walk us through how you got into triathlon?
Yeah, sure. My background is in running. So I started running when I was a schoolgirl in high school and ran quite competitively. I used to do the Australian domestic summer track season. I was always a middle distance runner, sort of anywhere from 800 metres. Gradually worked my way up to 5,000 metres on the track, and then in winter I used to love road racing and cross country. So yeah, as a junior I also swam for my school, competed for my school in swimming, and got to squad level swimming, but swimming wasn't where my real passion lied. I certainly loved running, and then sort of in my about 4 years ago I got into triathlon, and so it's been a relatively new sort of venture for me, but really enjoying it.
Yeah, and so how did you find the introduction to triathlon? So you had the running background. It sounds like you had a swimming background, which is usually the thing people struggle with. So you had that. I mean, so I guess ultimately you just had to sort of get some cycling in and then just fit them together, right?
Yeah, I actually, when I was about 23, I fell out of love with running. I was taking the sport really, really seriously, and it sort of became all too consuming, and I lost the sort of rational perspective of why I was doing the sport in the first place, and I ended up just throwing in the towel, and I actually moved away from Perth, where I live, and booked a one-way trip to London and just took off and wanted a new adventure. And then it was, 2 years into that time in London when I sort of really started to realise that I hadn't fulfilled my potential in competitive sport, and that was a huge part of me that was missing, and I wanted, I yearned for that fulfillment, and I wanted to, I just knew I hadn't reached my potential in competitive sport. And I met my now current coach, Julian Nagy, when I was in London. I was working as a physiotherapist over there, and I was working with quite a few of his athletes, and I started to discuss the way I felt with him, and he sort of started, subtly planting the seed, I guess, to get me involved in triathlon, and I started swimming with his squad in London. And then the time came for me to leave London, and I returned to Perth, and he just kept checking in with me, and he sort of encouraged me to give it a go and maybe buy a bike initially and see if I liked the cycling. And one thing just led to another, and here we are today.
Yeah, awesome. So talking, speaking of potential, so, you just recently finished Kona, and, at the Ironman World Championships, you came in first overall for female. So, I mean, huge result. So let's talk about that a little bit. So congratulations, first of all. But, what were your expectations going into the race? So obviously you qualified, you had success at other Ironman events, but, were you expecting the possibility of coming first overall, or, what was your thought process?
Look, going into the race, my thought process was, it was exactly just about the race, and I had such a clear race plan that Julie and I had sort of formulated, and we'd had big discussions leading into 2017 about Kona, and I'd qualified early, and so it was sort of a big build up, but it was funny, in that whole time we never really discussed the result that we wanted. It was just always about the process, but deep down, I'd been at Kona in 2016, and, I knew what it was all about. And going into 2017, I know deep down I knew, without sort of ever having verbalised it, I knew what I wanted out of the race, and I was really hungry for the age group win. I'd sort of thought a little bit about the overall age group win, but that didn't mean as much to me as just winning my age group, but it was one of those rare days where it all came together, and just really pleased with the result.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely amazing. So, how did the race go for you? Obviously, it was a great day, but was there any surprises, any obstacles, anything that happened that, wasn't expected?
Not really, but I must say I did have a pretty sort of smooth sailing race. I felt like I had a great start in the swim that was relatively sort of comfortable. My bike probably, I had, that was the focus for me in 2017, and I had worked really, really hard at the bike, and so I was really pleased with how that went. And then, I think something that I do struggle with in the Ironman distance is that sort of sense of enormity of the run. As I get onto the run, I just sort of become a bit overwhelmed with how far I have to run, and particularly in Kona, where it's just so brutal. And I think that's one thing, I'm probably a little bit disappointed is that I let that sort of probably get to me mentally a little bit at the start of the run, and I just I want to not fear the run distance and just sort of pull it apart and take it 1 mile at a time. But in answer to your question, it was a pretty good day out, and yeah, I certainly can't really complain.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I couldn't do much better. So that was amazing. But, so you, as you said, you had, pretty much, a great day on, on a huge stage, right? So how did you, I guess maybe it's your running background, competitive running background or what, but, I often wonder, I watch the Olympics and I say, well, these people train 4 years for, in the 100-meter for 5 seconds and they somehow can peak right. I mean, how did you go about making sure you peaked right for this A race? I mean, and, I guess from a training and a tapering perspective, how did you approach it?
Look, I guess I just tried not to build it up to be anything bigger than it was. My coach is always emphasising to me that it's just another race. And, I think I'm very fortunate in that I just absolutely love racing as well, and I just couldn't wait to get out there. The journey into the race wasn't always smooth sailing. I sort of, 3 weeks out, I had a complete sort of 7 days off training because I was quite sick. And I think, approaching it and, it's just such a mental battle, the Ironman distance, and you just have, I just had to draw sort of a huge amount of confidence in the process and the lead up that I'd had, and all the hard work was done. And I think, just sticking to my race plan on the day and just have, as I've said, just huge confidence in the work that I'd done. And I think, one of the greatest things is that I'd been there in 2016, and I think that the approach I took to the race in 2016 set me in really good stead for 2017. It was Kona is a course that demands a lot of respect, I think, and in 2016, that was my dress rehearsal, and I learnt a lot about the conditions and about, what it takes to sort of conquer that course in 2016, and knowing that I could, I probably was a little bit conservative in my approach that year, but knowing I got through it with a pretty favourable experience that year, I knew that this year I could return and throw a little bit more at it. Yeah. And I was far less afraid of it, and I'd really sort of been able to spend a good couple of weeks out there and pick apart the course and know confidently where I was prepared to push it a little bit more, where I was going to hold back and conserve a little bit more energy, and just work with the conditions, and it is a race that you have to be prepared to adapt on the day to the conditions, and be mentally prepared for whatever may be thrown at you on the day.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can't discount the experience and the confidence you need to go into a race like that and be successful. And it sounds like last year that that test run allowed you to come into it with that state of mind. So that, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, at what point in the race did you actually lead? At what point did you know you were the female leader?
Look, I knew I was sort of towards the front of the swim, but I knew there were girls in front of me. And then I actually I had practiced that first sort of loop in town on the bike, I reckon over a dozen times in training while I was out there. And I knew that was a part of the bike course that I wanted to work. It's quite a hectic few kilometres at the start with heaps of riders on the road. And I just knew I wanted to work that quite hard and sort of get onto the highway sort of as out in front as I could, and then just really relax into my race plan. And I think I passed quite a few girls in that part in town. And then as I was heading out on the Queen K's, saw a few more, and guys actually started talking to me on the course, riders saying that they hadn't seen another female coming through. And, often the age group men were pointing that out to me. And then going, through at the end of the Queen K, there's always a huge crowd down that turn, and a few people were pointing out that, that's the first age group female. So I had a fairly good idea that I was right out the front, and I didn't see a lot of girls out on the bike course, to be honest. So I knew I was in a good position, and then sort of it was confirmed as I came back in off the bike, and I knew I was heading out into the run in first place. And so it was sort of just about sort of trying to stay calm, but stay in control, I guess.
Yeah, that's the next question I was going to ask. So then you come off the bike, you're in the lead, and there's some out and backs on the course. So I assume eventually you saw kind of how big of a lead you had. I mean, were you running scared? How did you kind of stay within yourself and just sort of, like you said, I mean, it's a big distance, the marathon, and it's the heat and all that stuff. Mentally, that had to be tough.
Yeah. No, it was tough, but I just tried to stay confident, and I knew if nothing sort of disastrous happened, I mean, you never really know in terms of your nutrition or what could possibly happen, but I knew with my running background that I was probably strong enough to hold the lead. In saying that, on reflection since, I've looked back on my run splits with my coach, and it was a little bit disappointing. I did definitely pace the run wrong, and I did go out way too fast, and I don't think my run time is the true reflection of what I'm probably capable of. But, I take confidence that, given that I did go out way too hard in the run, that I was able to hold on. And, I think in the end of the day, it just comes down to how much you really want it. I just kept picking it apart.
Yeah. And so I guess, from a, what would you do differently perspective, it sounds like, pacing the run would be one thing. Is there anything else you would, as you and your coach kind of debriefed and looked at the race, is there anything else you would have approached or done differently?
I think for myself, just, like as I alluded to at the start, just I wish I had more sort of confidence on the run. And I think it comes with practice as well. That was my fourth Ironman, and I think, with a few more under my belt, I will get better at pacing that. But I think I would really like to get onto that run course in Kona and not fear, the heat and the elements, and just confidently run like to my potential. And so, but I don't have any regrets from that race this year. I think you learn something from every race, and hopefully I take what I've learned and can apply it next time I head out there.
Yeah. So speaking of the heat, I mean, did you do anything specific to deal with the heat? I mean, in terms of training, preparation or anything in the race to kind of adapt or deal with it?
Training wise, I didn't do a great deal. I did head out there 2 weeks early, and I think that really made a big difference. Getting used to it. I think, by the start of the second week that I was out there, I was feeling a lot more comfortable running in the heat, and I certainly noticed that difference compared to last year, where I only had sort of 6 days prior to the race out there. it's a shame we come off Perth winter. You know, it doesn't get freezing cold here by any stretch, but it's certainly not hot, and so it's not ideal. But I didn't do any specific heat training in Perth. On race day, when it comes to dealing with the heat, you know, keeping my core body temperature down as best as I could was a huge focus, particularly. I mean, I started that on the ride. I would always grab that, and, you know, the water on the ride at the aid stations is usually pretty icy cold as well, which and I was pouring a lot of that over my head and my shoulders, just trying to keep my body temperature down. And then likewise on the run, every mile, you know, every aid station was just about sponges and ice and whatever I could to keep as cool as I could until that next aid station, and that certainly makes a massive difference. And I guess, and yeah, learning to deal with that is so important out there.
Yeah. And then from a nutrition perspective, you know, what was your approach there? Because again, the heat is a big factor. Of course, Ironman nutrition is important in general, but you know, I just, you know, imagine cramping and other things would be kind of a concern for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. So just, you know, and I think that with nutrition, the key is on the bike. You know, you really got to get your calories in early and throughout the whole bike leg. And, you know, I was just drinking lots on the bike, but also not drinking too much. You know, I think the best advice someone ever gave to me in terms of drinking, and it was my coach when I'm out racing in full and half Ironman distance, is to drink to thirst, because I think sometimes as well, you know, we're told to drink, you know, and I think it's X amount of fluid. And being a runner and from a running background, I used to hate the sensation of getting off the bike, and I just felt like I always had drunk way too much, and I just felt really uncomfortable on the run, and particularly if you're drinking a lot of Gatorade and you've got all that sugar in your gut. And so that was some really good advice that's helped me over the years, and you know, and consciously try to drink, but just, you know, not overdoing it, drinking to thirst, and then eating every hour on the bike. I actually eat chocolate on the bike.
Oh, nice. I was going to ask.
Yeah, yeah. I don't particularly enjoy stomaching gels, and so, you know, and I was always unsure of what to eat on the bike. And my coach was like, "What do you love?" And he's like, "Do you love chocolate?" And I said, "I love chocolate." And for me, it's also, you know, you get to that next hour on the bike, and you're like, "Yes, another hour gone." Another chocolate bar, and so, you know, mentally it's something to look forward to as well. So yeah, that's my bike nutrition. And then, to be honest, on the run, I never follow a really strict routine with nutrition. I make sure I always grab water and Gatorade, and later on in the run Coke at each station. And then I do really monitor it on feel. You know, if I am feeling like I'm sort of, you know, becoming a bit low in energy, I was grabbing a few quarters of oranges on the bike and just sucking them. I suck a lot of ice cubes as well in between aid stations. Throw a cup down my top, and then one sort of ice cube at a time, start sucking on it. So I always had something in my mouth to stop my mouth getting too dry. But yeah, I must say I'm quite sort of flexible with how I approach my run nutrition, and just sort of and really dictate it on how I'm feeling at the time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's sort of how I approach it too, although I don't have the success that you've had, but I sort of have a pretty disciplined approach on the bike, and then the run is sort of, you know, whatever I feel, because it's sort of my nutrition sort of, you know, changes throughout the run, because it's just sort of like, what do you feel like? How do you feel? That kind of thing. So besides the things you've already mentioned, are there any other tips you would offer anyone who, you know, is going into Kona and looking to, you know, have a good day? Is there anything else that, you know, you would tell them to do or not to do?
I think, you know, the biggest thing is just don't build it up to be anything bigger than it is. You know, it really is just another race. And, you know, race within yourself and stick to your race plan, because you have trained according to that plan. And so stick to your plan, race your race. And, you know, it's one of those days where anything can happen. And I think you have to have faith in your process and draw confidence from that in terms of your ability and what your potential is and what your potential outcome would be. But just honestly, it's just another race.
Yeah. I think one of the issues would be they have so many events. There's so many famous pros there. There's so much going on. And if you get kind of wrapped up in all that, which is fun, but it then sort of makes the racing way bigger than it actually is. It's just another Ironman race in another location, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about training. So as you said before, you are, by trade, a physiotherapist, and I'm curious to find out a little bit about how that background helps with being a triathlete, from a injury prevention perspective or just kind of strength building. I mean, what are kind of, what have you learned from your profession that you apply to your triathlon training? Yeah,
100%. I actually feel very lucky that, I've got a really good understanding of the human body and I like to think, I've got a really good understanding of my body and my strengths and weaknesses and, so that sets me in good stead in training and, incorporating strength training, knowing what I really need to focus on. And as well, if I do get the onset of a niggle, I'm usually pretty good at being able to identify it acutely and know what I need to do sort of to manage that and to get me back to the best physical health in the most sort of sensible time frame as well. And so, I feel very blessed that my occupation and my knowledge through that occupation and, ties in so well with the sport. In saying that as well, my involvement in sport helps my profession so much because, I'm fortunate enough to work with a lot of other triathletes who share that common sort of interest with me and the love for the sport. And, I love being able to give back to the sport in that sense. But, certainly the sport and the profession goes hand in hand. But, and I think a lot of the treatment that I have with other athletes is not just treating their injury as such, but just really sort of focusing with them on what they can learn from that presentation going forward to make them a stronger athlete. And, I think in terms of preventing injury as well, I feel really lucky that, I do sort of closely monitor my volume and my sort of my loading patterns and how that's progressing throughout the training program and sort of making sure that is sensible and minimising risk of injury that way, because I think that's where athletes, age group athletes go wrong a lot of the time, is that they haven't managed their load correctly, which poses huge injury risks throughout the training plan.
Right. And so, assuming, let's talk about that for a second. So, from a loading perspective, I mean, if someone starts to have some signs of overtraining or some niggles, I mean, how do you know, from your professional perspective, how would you recommend an athlete know? Is it something to be ignored? Like, it's just sort of normal training stress, or something, hey, this is, you need to take a step back, you need to take a week off, or you need to, reset your training plan. I mean, it's kind of a hard balance and hard thing to know for really someone difficult. With not a lot of experience.
Yeah. That is a really difficult call. Taking, when managing load, if you say to an athlete, okay, you need to take a week off because of some, this pain you experience, whatever, is that necessarily the right thing to do as well? Because, a lot of sort of chronic, tendon injuries and things, they actually respond quite well. The latest research is saying to loading, and to completely offload those structures like an Achilles tendon isn't actually necessarily the correct thing to do. And so it's about learning to manage that loading pattern and how much you load at a certain period of time, which is really, really difficult, and really difficult for athletes who may not have the same understanding that someone like myself has got. But I think what, a really important thing as an athlete is for you to see, even if it's a case that you don't have a coach and you may be self-coaching, you need to record weekly, and daily, the sessions that you're doing, so that you can look back and reflect on your loading pattern, and keeping tabs on how that is progressing throughout the plan, and realizing that if you got to your long run on a Sunday one week and you managed your 27 kilometers that Sunday, but it was Joe's wedding the next Sunday and you actually missed the training, that is a week where you've missed the load, and then to go and step up 2 weeks later and make it your 32 or 34 run, that really does increase your risk of injury tenfold. And you may not think that at the time, but in hindsight, looking back, that wasn't the right thing to do. And just realizing how sort of much condition you can lose in quite a small time frame as well, and just, or if you're sick or anything, and being sort of realizing that it's okay to make those changes and adaptations to your program to minimize your risk of injury.
Right. Yeah.
It is a really difficult one, and I think if you're not sure, then seek the professional advice and know what you can do and what you should what you can't do to any given period, given what you may be experiencing. And the beauty of triathlon is that we have the 3 disciplines of swim, bike, run, and so often if you have a running specific injury, you may have to reduce your run volume for a period of time, but it gives you a great opportunity to focus on the other aspects of the sport. So and that's one way to really stay motivated and to keep progressing in a positive direction.
Right. And then from a strength training perspective, I mean, obviously, as a physiotherapist, you would prescribe stuff based on imbalances or an injury or whatever. But for someone who's sort of just on their own training or with a coach or whatever, it's easy to say swim, bike, and run. But I think sometimes strength training is overlooked. I mean, how much strength training do you do, or would you recommend someone doing in a kind of a normal course triathlon program? And what kind of exercises would they be?
Yeah, it's funny. It's quite, there's so much research out there, and it is sort of confusing. And what works for one might not work for another. And this year, actually, 2017, for the first time, I had an injury coming off the back of 2016, and so I decided that I needed to incorporate regular and individualized specific strength training at least twice a week into my training program. And, prior to 2017, my strength work was sort of done in the specific disciplines. I would do a lot of, heavy gearing or hill work on the bike or hill running in the run, or lots of, paddle work in the swim. And there wasn't any sort of specific sort of out of context to the sport strength training. But this year I have added it in, and, being someone who knows enough to probably self-prescribe and do it myself, I still sort of got the help of a strength and conditioning coach twice a week, and that ensured for me, someone who has quite a busy schedule, that I had that appointment with this coach twice a week for half an hour, 45 minutes, and I knew I had to be there, and because of that I fitted in, and I was really disciplined with it. And so that was more quite a heavy weight sort of bias, a bit of plyometric strength program for 30 to 40 minutes just twice a week, and I had a pretty smooth sailing year in terms of injury, and so I think that was definitely a great help, and I think it has helped me on the bike in bringing down my bike time this year, and if I'm another addition is some clinical reform Pilates. I do prescribe a lot of that with clients, and it's something that I do intermittently as well when I've got time. But yeah, and I think, trying to make your strength training as functional as you can to the sport. And so, working muscle groups that are important for the 3 disciplines, and also, mixing it up a little bit from time to time, knowing when to progress it and when to add in new and different exercises, and Yeah, but look, it is individual, and it does depend on where you are in your training sort of cycle. But I do think it is a very important component, and it has certainly sort of paid dividends for me this year. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, I like your strategy of hiring someone for half hour twice a week or whatever, because it forces you to go somewhere
it's just something that becomes neglected otherwise. I think because
totally
we become all too consumed with getting in your long rides and your long runs and
exactly
yeah.
And then from the recovery perspective, I mean, what do you, there's so many options out there, right? But you obviously have a professional background and you also are a successful athlete. I mean, what do you do or what would you recommend? And again, I know it's individual, but just sort of, there's foam rolling, there's ice, there's heat, there's a million things, but kind of what are the things that you kind of focus on?
Yeah, so to be honest, I don't do a lot of, I know I'm a physio, but I don't do a lot of foam rolling or spiky balling or things like that. I do stretch after a session. Certainly as soon as I finish a run, I do a sequence of a few stretches. I do quite a lot of running specific dynamic drills at the end of, after a run, maybe once or twice a week. I'll incorporate those, skipping sort of base drills into my cool down. I was very sort of diligent in fortnightly massage, just as part of my training routine. I think in terms of recovery, nutrition is really important as well. I looked at nutrition to, as soon as I finished a session, within that sort of half an hour, having something there ready to go. So I knew I was refueling my body, particularly when you're backing it up with big sessions the next day. Sleep's a big one. It's probably one of my downfalls. But trying to get in enough sleep each night. And then, my coach and I had worked out, over the last few years, a formula that sort of worked for me in terms of the training cycle and then when we were factoring in a few recovery days. So generally I can go sort of 4 weeks of pretty sort of, consecutive day, most days training every day without a rest day. I go about 4 weeks. Obviously there were within that, some days where it might just be a swim for an hour and a half, and so that was a lighter day. But after that sort of 4 week mark, it was definitely time for me to take sort of 3-4 really, really light days. So, I might do 30 times 50 metre swims at the pool one day. I might do a 30-minute indoor spin really easy the next day, and I sort of would take those recovery days at that 4 week mark and then get ready to take off again. But then as well, acknowledging those days where even if you're sort of mid-training cycle and you're just completely fatigued or, you feel like you might be coming down with something, I guess you sort of learn the hard way, but learn that, you've getting that as early as you can and acknowledging that you're tired and that it is okay to take a rest day and, not to try and do training when you're sick is something that's going to pay huge dividends if you can knock that on the head, early on as well. So, it's about listening to your body and just being sensible.
Right. Yeah. It's like your body gives you the signals and the feedback, but a lot of times we either are just not in tune with it or we ignore it. And that's kind of a recipe for ending in a bad place. I
think it's funny. We get so carried away with, making sure everything about our bike is the best and everything, and you can throw so much money at the bike and your gear, whereas, you're not going to get anywhere without your body and a healthy body and invest some money into your physio or into your strength training or into your massage because, it's the most important piece of equipment, really.
Yeah, that's such a good point. People will spend, thousands and thousands on race wheels, but they won't spend whatever on a massage or strength training or whatever. Yeah. So it's the irony of the sport, I suppose.
It's crazy.
So a couple quick questions before we finish here, because I know we're running over, and I want to respect your time. But really quickly, I mean, what does your training look like? From an hours perspective, just so we all have a sense. I mean, what is is your normal, average and peak weeks of training?
I think my average sort of week of training is probably about 19 or 20 hours a week when I'm sort of really in my solid training. I think maybe the most I got to was maybe 22 hours, and with my work schedule, so working sort of 40 to 45 hours a week, that is definitely my limit. Work day, well, I work Monday to Friday, and so some days I might be doing sort of an hour and a half sessions twice a day. I might do sort of a 3-hour block after work one day, and then on the weekends I really sort of maximise that time to get out and do my sort of longer ride or longer run or longer brick sort of sessions on the weekend.
Cool. And then one final question would be, what's next? So what are you planning for in 2018 and sort of beyond? I mean, now that you've had this huge result at Kona, where do you go from there?
Yeah, look, I'm just sort of in recent, last couple of days sitting down with my coach to start formulating a plan for 2018. I know for sure that I'm not done yet, and I think I've still got a little bit more in me, and so I am starting to get hungry to get out there again. I don't think I'm going to race for the rest of 2017, but starting to have a think about where I want to go next, and potential changes that I feel like I need to make in order to take it to that next level and sort of really ensure that I can discover my potential in the sport, because I think I've got a fair bit left in me, and so yeah, it was just sort of starting discussions without making any sort of definite plans at this point. But I guess the option for me, there is the option for me to turn professional. A lot of people, have been asking me that question, and it's something that if I'm going to decide to do that, I want to do it properly, and I want to be able to really commit, what I the time that I believe is required of me in order to make that commitment to the sport, and whether I'm prepared to make those changes in the rest of my life in order to make that commitment. I've got this relentless desire to be able to work and to train and to compete and do it all, but realistically, if becoming a professional, I think you're making a commitment to the sport, and I'd like to ensure that I'm willing to commit 100% if that's what I decide to do.
Yeah, no, that makes 100% sense. Well, Emily, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, I learned so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and congratulations again on Kona. I mean, just absolutely amazing result, and it sounds like a lot of hard work was put into it, so well deserved and earned as well.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Intelligent Racer podcast. For more information on this and other episodes, please visit www.intelligentracer.com. Also, be sure to check us out on social media, and please review us on your podcast directory. Join us next time for another edition of the Intelligent Racer.